And that's the biggest thing that I try to lay into them is having some sort of accountability and understanding what goes under your control, what viewing it from the perspective of what do I control, and then making a change based on that, and everything else is obsolete.
Welcome to another exciting episode of Pushing Your Pace podcast. On this episode, I sat down with Omardi Morris, the founder of Concrete Jungle, a youth basketball developmental program on the island of Grand Turk, and the owner of Concrete Jungle Gym. Omardi is not only a successful coach and business owner, but he's also the recipient of the Junior Humanitarian of the Year 2023 award. On this episode, Omardi shares his insights on the P perspective and how it has been a key factor in his success. He practices stoicism as a way of life and instills these ancient philosophies in his mentees. Omardi dropped so many gems, you don't want to miss a second of this episode. So grab your popcorn and let's get ready to push some P's. Well, Omardi, I just want to thank you on coming on Pushing Your Pace podcast. It's a pleasure to have you on the show. And on this show, all we do is push our P's to happiness and well-being and fulfillment. And the piece we're going to talk about today, specifically with you, because I view you as one of the most brilliant young minds in our society. I call you a philosopher. I believe you are a modern day Aristotle or Marcus Aurelius. You have that persona. But I just want to pick your mind a bit before we dive into perception, because that's the P we're going to be talking about. I want you to tell me, because you do a lot of reading, you studied some of the great philosophers throughout times. How do you define happiness?
I feel like happiness is a state of just, you can't, it's very hard to describe, but I feel like it's a sense of fulfillment. Because happiness is so hard to attribute to joy, because there's obviously days when you're going to be sad. We're human. And happiness just has to be pursuing your purpose. You find fulfillment in knowing that you were put here to do something and you're working every day to reach closer to that thing that you put there. You find yourself being happy even though the days might not be as up and bright as they should be when you're pursuing your purpose and pursuing the thing you're passionate about. And you find fulfillment and happiness almost being the same thing.
Omardi, you someone that studied, again, some of the greatest philosophers throughout history. What perspective of life do you hold? Like, what's your philosophy, or not philosophy, but perspective? Like how do you view life?
I see life as something that's limited. I'm one of those random people who only have one tattoo, and the tattoo is Latin for memento mori, that the Stoic said, and it's a reminder of my mortality and that someday I'll cease to exist. And I see that giving me almost a sense of joy, in the sense that I have to appreciate and view things and not take myself so seriously when those moments come, view it from a different perspective. When I find myself being frustrated that things aren't going my way, it's like, all right, this is a moment to view this differently and practice patience, because this life is limited. And, memento mori says, remember you're going to die. And some of these things that you worry about, one day you're going to be old and gray, and it wouldn't even matter to you. Those won't be the things you remember. So perspective plays a large role in that. And luckily I have this tattoo facing me, and it's a reminder to me every day that I just have to take things with a grain of salt.
Develop multiple programs in your community, mostly centered around the empowerment and development of young men. Why did you launch these programs? Why did you start coaching basketball teams and things like that? What drives you to do that?
The biggest thing was just remembering that I was one of those kids at one point in time, and I remember the feeling. Grand Turk being a very small place that it is, there was always a lack. And I see this now. We're moving towards a culture where we bring the things we want into our country instead of waiting for it outside. I always saw the mixtapes, and I always saw the other kids online on YouTube having the best trainers or having the best coaches, and saying, "But if I got to the States, then I'll get all these opportunities." And one day I realized that, well, hold on, some of these kids won't have that opportunity. Why can't we bring it here? And I naturally just fell into a place where it was just me training myself, and all of a sudden, I realized I had a lot of people looking up to me and a lot of people coming to me for advice. And it was just taking initiative, and that's the hardest part with most things. Sometimes just taking the initiative and realizing you can do it, even if you start this small. People don't realize how a small step can make a big difference, and that was the thing for me. I just started.
You have these group of kids around you on a daily basis. What perspective? I know you have your perspective, but what perspective are you nurturing inside of them?
I try to give them something that I didn't have at their age, because I see in our society there's a lack of accountability, which is a huge word, where children, especially children, they find themselves a lot of times saying, pointing fingers. You find a child getting in trouble, and the first thing they do is try to blame someone else and say, "Well, it wasn't me." And you see it even with the older kids that I coach, that they tend to, the first thing they do is point fingers. And in small little things, I try to teach them, all right, if you pass the ball and someone turns it over, well, maybe you shouldn't have passed the ball because they wasn't looking. So you take some sort of accountability, or maybe you should have called their name, or maybe you should have said something. What could you have done about that? What control do you have? And going back to philosophy and stoicism, one of the biggest things that stoicism teaches you is controlling the events that you can control, worrying about those things, and everything else is obsolete. And that's the biggest thing that I try to lay into them, is having some sort of accountability and understanding what goes under your control, what viewing it from the perspective of what do I control, and then making a change based on that, and everything else is obsolete.
I've been studying, not really studying, but watching your pages a lot, Omadi. And one of the things that is a clear standout is your love for stoicism. Sorry. And I want to know what drew you to that.
I think it goes back to, it's crazy how some of the very things that affect us in terms of our own flaws draw us to the things, the exact opposite of that. Like if you find yourself being the worst leader in life sometimes, all of a sudden you draw to books that, or religions that give you leadership or whatnot. And I think the biggest thing for me was I was a very worrisome person when I was younger. I would find myself find it hard to make mistakes and being very judgmental of myself. And through reading and watching different podcasts and whatnot, this thing called stoicism just fell into my lap. And to think that these people were from thousands and thousands of years ago, but the advice that they're giving still applies now, usually says that, all right, this stands the test of time. And it really is hard to wrap my mind around it, that these are Roman emperors, for example, Marcus Aurelius. And that's why stoicism for me just means so much, because you have a slave in Epictetus, and then you have Marcus Aurelius on the other hand, who was the Roman emperor, the most powerful man in the world, and they're all applying stoicism and controlling the events they can control.
What is one quote that stands out above all that you've read about stoicism?
I'll give you two. I'll give you two. There's my favorite is well-being is realized by small steps, but there's no small thing. And that's from Zeno, the founder of Stoicism. And it always really resonates with me, because sometimes we feel like in making these small steps that it's just nothing, but you realize if you take 10 small steps a day, you'll end up so far and you won't even realize it. And then the next one is Marcus Aurelius, which is really a lot longer, but he's talking about getting up out of bed in the morning. And he's talking about waking up at dawn, and how you have to be called to something greater than you, just like the animals. The birds don't wake up in the morning and ask themselves, should I go and fly? The horses don't get up and say, all right, should I go and graze the ground? The trees don't say, all right, should I get up and bloom? If these are the things they're called to do, they get up and do it. But us as human beings, sometimes we find ourselves not doing the things we're called to do, and it doesn't make any sense because if you were really called to do, you would get up and do it anyway, despite how you feel. So it's just so powerful that a man who's supposed to be Roman emperor, who's practicing philosophy, this is the thoughts that he's thinking. He's sitting down writing these things to himself in a journal.
The thought just hit me. And, I know we're talking about perception right now and philosophy, but then I think we should touch on purpose a bit. That's another P I mentioned in my book. And how I talked about purpose in my book is that it's something that's ever evolving, meaning as we grow, our purposes grow. So um, I look at purpose as something, or I describe purpose in my book as something that's abundant to us, meaning you don't have just one set purpose. As you grow, as you go through the changes of life, you adapt different purposes and causes, right? And so I want to ask you, how did you know this was your purpose, what you're doing right now?
I It's hard to explain, and that's the crazy thing about purpose. Sometimes it's almost like people use that as love. When you know, and it goes back to you called to do something. In a lot of things in life, you find yourself making excuses to not do it. When something is purposeful, you usually find yourself making an excuse why you should do it, and you find yourself making the extra time. Like people say, you don't find time, you make time to do things. And for me, this has just always been it. It's always been I make time to read. I find the little 5 minutes when my car is parked to pull a book up, or I find myself in the little 10 minutes when I'm stopping somewhere at a grocery store or something, and I find time to read, or I pull out my phone and I read, and I realize, all right, this is probably something that I enjoy. And I like to share these things. I wake up and I want to. I get excited to share it. And obviously, for everyone, purpose isn't the same, but it's almost a thing where and you feel fulfilled. There's a feeling within you that you feel fulfilled, like you're doing something to change the world.
That feeling of fulfillment that you're serving something I would guess greater than yourself, and what
Yeah,
what
yeah.
advice what advice do you give to people who are struggling to find their purpose or even struggling with a perspective in life? Sometimes you do have those kids who don't feel like they have a calling or have a purpose or are pretty much holding the wrong perspective on things. How do you take them under your wing, and what are some of the things you tell them?
There goes a thing that's called, low hanging fruit. And it's a lot easier to do something when you just reach for the low hanging fruit. For me, it was just fitness, where I just found myself going out there and working out, and then I find myself now owning the gym. And when I begun, it was more so for me. I realized that this was easier for me to do. I didn't go out and say, all right, I want to help people. I went out and I helped myself. And I realized in that way how this made me feel, and maybe I want to give other people this. And I think for us to find purpose, we have to find a problem within us. We often go looking for purpose as this very special thing, but the first thing you do is just look for a problem. What's a problem in your community? What's a problem you have within? What's a problem that you feel like another person can solve? All right, I had this problem of not being confident. Now I'm a confident person. Well, maybe other people have this problem too. And you find your purpose in making that easier for other people. And people, fortunately enough, would probably pay a lot of money to solve that problem because you're making their life a lot easier. So I feel like as kids, what I try to tell them to do is, what's the first thing that's bothering you? And I tell them, well, do something small about it. Going back to what I said earlier, well-being is realized by small steps. Do something very small about that problem, and we work from there. And oftentimes they finally tell me, well, coach, I found out this, and they get so excited. And I didn't even have to give them the whole roadmap. I just gave them the first place to start from.
Purpose is found in, I would say, problem solving, right? That's what you're saying.
Oh
Looking for
yeah,
the
oh
problem
yeah.
in our community. Yeah. Again, I just want to thank you for coming on the show and sharing with us your philosophies. I mean, you've dropped a lot of gems already. And there's this young Omardi right now, fresh out of high school. Um, you being the person you are right now and the things that you've gone through, what advice would you give to him, Omardi, fresh out of high school? What advice would you give to your younger self?
I would tell him that he's human and it's okay to make mistakes, and that you don't have to be hard on yourself about it. But just understand that what you're feeling right now isn't very special. It isn't just special to you. Like, a lot of times we go back to speaking about purpose, which is a very important part of your book, but purpose can be found in so many aspects of your life. 17-year-old Omadi didn't know what his purpose was. It was the very problem of me not getting to where I wanted to be that found me pursuing my purpose, or the very problem of my community not having the leaders or the coaches that drew me into my purpose. And that's the biggest thing that I tell him is just find yourself just taking initiative and doing the small things that you could. It's very easy to just help in the smallest way you can possibly do. You're human, you won't have it all set together right now. And I feel like that young Omari was so hard on himself because teachers was telling him, oh, you gotta have your life together and you gotta go to college and you gotta get all these things sorted out and you have to know exactly where you want to go. And to me, it was like not knowing where I was going. It was so baffling because I thought this was only a feeling that I felt. But realizing now that so many people felt the same way, if I could tell him that, then maybe that'd ease a little bit of weight off his, little skinny shoulders.
Man, that's powerful, Marty, man. That's very powerful. And I think it's time we segue into the second half of the show. And this is where you push your piece. And I'm excited for this half because I want to hear what piece or even P that you would like to share with the audience that has been transformational um, to your journey. So you have the floor.
All right. The biggest one in my journey right now, has been patience. Patience has been the biggest one, and it's so funny because I've been practicing patience from time I was a little boy, and my mom would have me in the car for hours as she sat down and talked to everybody in the neighborhood. And I had to sit down in the car and just wait until she was ready to finish. And everybody knows how long it takes for mommy and Grammy to talk to everybody. And at those moments, I was getting so frustrated. But now it's almost like I got a superpower. And that's going back to problems. It took that very thing to give me the patience I have now. And being a gym owner, I realized that this is such a long process and a long goal and a long dream now that I can't just jump to where I want to be. That I have to patiently make the small steps and patiently, all right, get this piece here, get this piece here, get this piece here. In every aspect of my life, I tell myself that now I'm going to be a lot better when it comes to public speaking. And then I'm up here for a couple of weeks, and then the next week I'm down. But I have to be patient and understand that it's a process. It doesn't just happen. Oh, I shoot up, and then all of a sudden now I'm great at this. So that's the biggest one. That first one there, patience, is a superpower. If you could get that, then a lot of things become easier. And then the second one goes persistence. I tell myself that it's not if I'm gonna have a problem, it's when I have a problem. Because life isn't perfect. Nothing is ever gonna be perfect. I've dealt with grief in the form of death. I've dealt with sickness, injuries as a basketball player. I've dealt with so many things. And being a coach, you gotta teach that to your players. It's not if something goes wrong. When something goes wrong, how do we react? How do we adapt? And it takes persistence to be able to do that. It takes the ability to view the circumstances and overcome them, to adapt accordingly. And if you don't have persistence, then you're living in a very unreal world because something is going to happen. So how do you prepare for it? And stoicism tells us this is a very one, and this is also P. Stoicism has this thing where it's called premeditatio malorum, and it means premeditation of the evils to come. And it's almost like you start your day off, say, all right, today I'm gonna be met with very annoying, bothersome people. Or today I'm probably gonna have a client who doesn't pay on time. So now when it happens, it's almost like, all right, I've already prepared myself mentally for this. I already know how I would respond. I already know, all right, how I would react, so it doesn't catch you off guard. They always say the hardest blows is the ones that are unexpected. So going back to premeditatio malorum, if you practice, this is what's going to happen for the day. This might happen, and it doesn't catch you off guard, and that goes right back to persistence. When things happen, how do you respond? So those two P's are the biggest one for me. Interestingly enough, it was three.
You know, Marty, I mean, that last one you just shared, it's so powerful because I was recently on a trip to San Diego and I was sitting next to this military pilot, and he was telling me how he remains calm, um, how he remains calm when he's facing a battle or emergency, and he says that before he leaves his house, he accepts the fact that he might die today, and he makes peace. He makes peace with that, right? I mean, I'm getting goosebumps just thinking about it. He makes peace with that, and when that
Yeah.
tragic or that emergency situation arises, he is so calm because he already made peace with the fact that he is going to die today, and he sent all the messages that he needed to send, so he's good. So it can't, like when you said that premeditative thought, or that last P you shared, I can't pronounce the word. I'm not even gonna try. But when you said that, I thought about that for a minute. I'm like, yo, this is what the pilot was talking about. When we make preparations for the day, like let's say the worst possible scenarios, when those situations arise, we are at a complete state of calm because we've already accepted the fate of the situation. So that was profound, bro. Profound. And you wonder
Oh yeah.
why I
And
call you the philosopher.
and it goes back to what I was saying about philosophy. It's so beautiful because the truth is the truth. Someone, for example, a 2-year-old child could do something that a man from 5,000 years ago did, and if it's something that's actually valuable, it still stands the test of time. You have this pilot, this Air Force pilot, saying something that Marcus Aurelius, who lived thousands and thousands of years ago, or Jesus Christ said a long time ago, and these people probably never have heard having a conversation together, never spoke to each other, but they're saying the same thing, and it shows how philosophy and truth is the truth, and you can't deny it, no matter where it comes from.
It stands the test of time.
Oh yeah,
It stands the test of time. Well, Omari, you shared so much on this episode, and I just want to thank you for taking the time out of your day to be on this podcast. And this is the part. This is my favorite part of the show because this is where I get to ask a question that's unrelated to anything that we are talking about. But I feel like this question kind of falls into your because there's no question that I think you can answer because you're a philosopher. But here we go. Are you ready?
that's all.
All right, let's get it. If you can live forever, what what life eventually loses meaning?
It definitely will. Because what calls you to get up in the morning? It's the fact that you're probably gonna die. You're gonna pass away. It's like, all right, I only got so much time. What makes you rush to work? You have a certain time to meet. What makes you get to the airport at a certain time? It's gonna leave you. If you know the plane would always be there, then you'd probably never go. You'd probably be like, all right, well, you go whenever you feel like it. but we have a limited amount of time in this world. And ironically enough, I started with that saying, memento mori, remember you're going to die. And if I lose that, then what's my reason to live? It's the possibility of living an unlimited life almost is meaningless. It's the very fact that we're gonna pass away and we have something to leave for those next to us to give a better quality of life that gives us all meaning. And we have to use that as a superpower. And going back to the P that you used in your book, perspective, if we see death as not something that happens the day that you're buried and the day you pass away or something, but as something that happens every single day and with every single moment you die, because you'll never get back to that time again. You're never going to be as young as you are now. So why not make the most of this time? Why wait? So I don't know. I don't think I want to live 1,000 years. Of course, I don't know what happens next, but I don't want to live that long.
Profound, Omardi. Omardi, thank you so much for being on the show. Before we end the show, do you want to plug in any business or shout out anyone? This is your opportunity to do that right now before we wrap up.
I just want to tell everybody to go ahead and look up Concrete Jungle Basketball, Concrete Jungle GDT on Instagram. It's been a dream of mine since I was about 15 years old. I call it the Concrete Jungle because we're from Grand Turk, where there is no hardwood floor here, at least up to this moment, and it's a part of who we are. So Concrete Jungle is just Grand Turk. I don't view it as just basketball. I just view it as our culture in Grand Turk, the same way Leo takes his pride in South Caicos. If you want anything to describe Grand Turk, just look at Concrete Jungle GDT on Instagram, and we would love to have you guys here. Of course, basketball is what we live and breathe, and we bad in South Caicos. So that's just put it there.
I love this guy. Listen, make sure you guys go and support Concrete Jungle. Omardi does so much great things for these young men. They made what was it? 2 final runs consecutively. You've made it to the finals, Omardi.
Yeah, we did.
Yeah, 2 times in a. So Omardi has a phenomenal program, and as I always say, nothing goes without money. So please. Support him the best way you can. This guy is going places. I see him coaching the national team that's going to go to the Olympics in the next 10 years in this country. Omardi Morris, I said it here on radio. It's been a pleasure having you on Pushing Your Peas, Omardi. Any final words, last words before we wrap up?
I just want to say, I want to thank you for allowing me to be on the show. And of course, I want to tell you that you are absolutely an inspiration to me. Like the fact that you live and breathe, bringing things to the Turks and Caicos that people thought were impossible. It's very hard to see anyone successfully going for a podcast every week, someone putting their show out on RTC, someone writing a book and viewing themselves from a different standard, not just as a Turks author, but a worldwide author, LT Bonda author. It's an inspiration, man. I know people probably don't say it to you, and I don't always share those words, but I'm always watching, and I'm always taking those little lessons from you. So I want to give you all the credit that you deserve, and thank you again for having me on.
For sure, Omardi. Ladies and gentlemen, Omardi Morris, philosopher, coach, entrepreneur, so many hats to you. We'll see you next week on Pushing Your Peers.